Today on Upfront, the U.S. immigration showdown. The president and congressional Republicans at odds over executive action. How should Congress react? It's my question today for Republican Congressman-elect Glenn Grothman. Then the state legislature will come back more Republican and more conservative next year. Today, two retiring moderates on whether they see the end of an era in Madison.
Covering the issues important to Wisconsin. This is Up Front with Mike Goucher.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Up Front. It's been 10 days now, and Republicans remain outraged over President Obama's executive order shielding as many as 5 million undocumented immigrants from deportation. Republicans have threatened a lawsuit. There's even been talk of another government shutdown. Now, Speaker John Boehner has vowed legislative action to counter the president's plan, but so far he's not offered details. Republicans say they prefer a step-by-step approach to immigration reform. Wisconsin Republican Senator Ron Johnson was on this program 2 weeks ago, and he promised a strong border security bill and a guest worker program. Today, we're looking ahead to what might happen with immigration reform in the new, more Republican Congress. We're joined by Congressman-elect Glenn Grothman, a Republican from Campbellsport. Senator Grothman, good to have you on the program.
Glad to be on the show.
Let's talk about your trip to Washington before we get into immigration. How do you see the role you're going to play there? Because you've heard the media reports. They say you're going to be a bomb thrower. You'll be a problem for John Boehner. How do you view your role?
Well, those things just aren't accurate. You know, I think the way to judge a politician in the future is what he's done in the past. And when I was in Madison, first of all, I wasn't leadership, wasn't a bomb thrower. I was the assistant Senate Majority Leader. Obviously, that would be years before you'd aspire to leadership. But I accomplished a lot in a lot of fields. I was very big on business stuff, big on tort reform, big on business taxes. I expect to do the same thing in Washington. I expect to be able to help my colleagues in their elections in the future, and that's one way we begin to get to know more people. Already I spent time with the 40 or 45 other Republican freshmen, getting to know them, networking, and becoming effective that way. So I look to be I guess I'll call it constructive conservative. One of the more conservative people up there, particularly when it comes to government spending, certainly when it comes to welfare, but on the other hand, not somebody who is just votes no for the thrill of voting no. I expect to get a lot done.
How about the word compromise? Will that be in your vocabulary when you go to Washington?
Sometimes you get a whole loaf, sometimes you get a half a loaf. I mean, there are things I got done in Madison I'm very proud of, things like the manufacturer's tax credit, which nobody thought I could get done. We got the whole thing. Sometimes you only get half a loaf. You get what you can get.
Let's talk about immigration for a moment, because right now we have the president over here with his executive order and the Republican Congress over here and not happy. What do you think Republicans should be doing at this moment in time? You've got several options. Some people say they're not good options, any of them. What do you think the Congress should be doing?
Well, you're right. We don't have a good option because, quite frankly, we haven't enforced the border for a long time. Barack Obama has done a bad job, and quite frankly, George Bush did a bad job before that. So you have all these people coming into the country. Now, it is completely ridiculous that we have a situation in which we have people waiting legally to come into the country for 10, 12, 14 years from Mexico and other places. Meanwhile, we're letting people in who are circumventing the law. The first thing you have to do is you have to secure the border. And I really wouldn't trust any president until they secure the border. I mean, that's something Barack Obama could do today. And if you really want to believe our immigration laws mean something, that's something that has to be done. I would hope the Republicans would do something with funding, if necessary, right away in January and February to see whether Barack Obama really does want to secure the border. The second thing you have to look at is right now, well, many of the people are coming here for the right reasons, to work hard. Some people are coming for the wrong reasons. And the next thing we have to do is we have to look at the welfare benefits and make sure that it is being enforced, that illegal people coming here illegally are not getting those benefits. And we know right now sometimes those rules are not being enforced, and people are coming from the wrong reasons, and people south of the border are being made aware of the generous benefits. And once those things are taken care of, then we can begin to look at the people who are here today.
For now, though, do you think that Republicans should sue to try and stop the president? Should they consider withholding funding for certain programs, shutting down government? What can they do right now?
Absolutely, they should sue if they can. And let's not forget, you know, I've been told there have been 20 times at the Supreme Court unanimously with President Obama's own appointees have struck down actions by him or his administration. There's no question we should take legal action if we can, because the president has shown in the past he's not constrained by the Constitution. He'll do things and say, apparently an attitude of if I'm doing something unconstitutional, we'll wait and let the Supreme Court tell me.
How would you feel about a shutdown of the government, though, or doing what Ted Cruz has suggested, not voting on certain nominees, withholding support of those in an effort to get the president's attention?
Well, to a certain extent, we have to play hardball. I'm not sure I like the idea of shutting down the government. We'll have to see how that would play out politically. Certainly, when it comes to the budget bills that are coming up, there's going to have to be a little bit of a showdown, not only on immigration, but other issues as well with President Obama, because I assume he's going to want to spend a lot more on a lot of programs than we are. After all, just the fact that right now we're borrowing 20% of our budget does show there are going to be some big differences between the president and us on government spending.
You mentioned welfare reform being one of your priorities. That's something you talked about quite a bit during your campaign for Congress. What can you hope to do as a member of Congress to address that?
Well, the first thing you got to do is you have to educate people. And already I started that process when I was up there the past week. Okay, so your viewers are aware. A single parent with a couple of kids can easily get $35,000 a year in total benefits between the health care and the earned income credit and the food share and the low-income housing and what have you. When you look at such a large amount, and that's after taxes, how many people make $35,000 a year after taxes? Most people don't. When you look at that amount of money, which is in essence a bribe not to work that hard, or a bribe not to marry somebody with a full-time job, people immediately realize you have a problem. And then as soon as you realize you have a problem and something has to be done, then you look at the generosity of the benefits and see what you can do to pare them back.
Bribe's a pretty strong word, don't you think?
Well, if you tell somebody you're going to get $35,000 if you don't get married, and you're not going to get anything if you marry somebody making $50,000 a year, I don't know, it's certainly a strong incentive not to raise children in wedlock.
And you think you can make a dent on that issue, given the dynamics of Washington?
I think absolutely. Maybe only a little dent with Barack Obama as president, but if we get a better president in 2 years, I think we can make a big change.
You obviously will be stepping down from the legislature soon. I've got to ask you this question. You mentioned your record in the legislature. You were a power broker of sorts. What kind of transition is that going to be for you from somebody in Madison who now with a very conservative legislature probably could have done just about anything they wanted to do in terms of policy? Now you're going to Congress where you're one of more than 400. How do you reconcile that in your own mind?
Well, I just got to kind of put myself back to where I was in 1993 when I first got to the State Assembly. I didn't know those people. I didn't know the system at all. At least now I know a little bit what the legislative process is like. I know how important it is to network with everybody, important to use the media to get my side of the story out and maybe put pressure on other people. It will be a little frustrating because you're right. I think I passed over 30 bills in the last 2 years, and in Congress I could be there for 200 years and not pass 30 bills. But I do expect to have an influence, and we cannot solve the big problems in the state of Wisconsin without the federal government doing things differently, and that's why I'm there. But it will be an adjustment.
Senator Glenn Grothman, soon to be Congressman Glenn Grothman. It's good to have you back on the program.
Glad to be on the show.
You bet. Senator Grothman is giving up, as we mentioned, his state Senate seat for Congress. It's part of the turnover at the State House. Is it in some ways also the end of an era? We'll be looking at the changing times of 2 retiring state senators, part of a vanishing breed of moderates. That's when Up Front continues.
Up Front with Mike Goucher, brought to you by the American Transmission Company and the Wisconsin Corn Growers Association.